All right, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Keith Whalen from RPI Consultants. I'm here with Mr. Chris Gordon, Mr. Zach Custodio for our debut webinar of this year's winter webinar series. Without further ado, I give you Chris and Zach.
Thanks very much, Keith. Thanks everybody for joining today. Zach and I are very happy to be here, and we're going to talk for the next hour or so about AM best practices. We're going to get started a little bit with what the AM system can do for you, the value that it can add to your organization. We're going to talk through the asset template, capitalizing through project accounting, some tips and tricks, processing within AM if you already have the asset management system. Hopefully you learned something from the tips and tricks section here. And then just some conversion best practices too, if this is a project that you end up undertaking yourself, some things that you want to keep in mind during conversion.
All right. Sorry. So a lot of you are probably already familiar with RPI. We are an Infor Alliance partner, Cloud Suite specialized, founded in Baltimore, Maryland, and headquartered here in 1999. And we have a nationwide practice of consultants spanning all aspects of the Infor Lawson solution. I believe this picture here is from Inforum this year from some of RPI's attendees.
Yep, Inforum, July 2017. All right, so let's get into it. What is the Lawson Asset Management System? So one, it's an integrated Lawson module within the full ERP system. And that provides value, that means something. Just like your PO system is integrated with GL, just like AP is integrated with GL, asset management has direct linkage or integration to your general ledger. So depreciation postings, asset addition postings, adjustments can all be performed in the AM subsystem, and that direct linkage to GL is there between the two systems. There's also integration between the AP subsystem and asset management, and we'll get into that a little bit later on today too. The AM system it's an accounting system, okay? So it's performing the asset, all the journal entries associated with asset additions, transfers, adjustments, and disposals. It's not a tracking system. It's not an asset tracking system, and we'll go over what it's not in just a second. But the message here is that it's just performing the accounting associated with all your fixed asset processes. There's the ability to generate assets from your subsystem, and we're going to go through that whole process in great detail in a little bit. What is the AM, or what is it not? So it's not a tracking system. We don't have the ability to say, an oil change is coming due on this car or this vehicle or this fleet of vehicles in 6 months. Remind us, right? The system's not going to remind us of those types of maintenance things. Infor's enterprise asset management system is that type of asset management system. But Lawson's S3 asset management system is strictly an accounting system. So important to make that distinction up front on what the system can do versus what it cannot do. So maybe you're out there and you don't have the asset management system, or you don't have it implemented, but maybe you own it, and you're looking into what it can do for you. So why would you want to implement AM? Well, for starters, not only can you track your accounting book on your asset, but the system's got the flexibility to allow for additional books, right? So if you have a state book or a federal book, you have the flexibility to add as many books as your organization has to your asset and base reporting off of those books. So each book can have different conventions, different methods, different lives, all for the same asset to meet the requirements for your state, federal, whatever type of reporting you have there. The other thing which we first mentioned is that it's an integrated system. So an asset generated in AM is going to produce journal entries, right? And those journal entries get transferred over to GL. From a GL90 form, you have the ability to drill down on that transaction and get all the information back from your AM subsystem. So the tight integration between AM and GL is a value. not only for asset additions, but depreciation, disposals. Any journal entry created and sent to GL, you have the ability to drill back to the AM system. You don't have that ability, obviously, if you're tracking assets in a spreadsheet, right? If everything is outside of Lawson and you're performing this calculation or these calculations each month and then just creating booking a GL journal entry, you don't have that drill back functionality to the detail which would reside in the AM system. So same thing there with the bullet number 3, the reconciliation, right? If you have your system creating all this detail, then it's easier to reconcile a GL account back to the AM subsystem because you know all the detail came from that AM subsystem. So there's really good reports out there to run at month end to perform that reconciliation between AM and GL. There's asset addition reports like the AM 220. There's transfer reports like the AM 230, adjustments like the AM 225. All of those can be run at month end to support the detail or the transactional history that you've done throughout the month, which should then tie to your GL. Depreciation, so obviously the Lawson system has a depreciation program. It's the AM 180, which needs to be run once a period at least. And that will perform all of the, it'll calculate all the depreciation for your assets and send that record or the depreciation records to your GL. Set and forget, we put assets into the system. We let, we run depreciation every month. We close out the periods. We let Lawson book what it needs to book. So you're not really forgetting about it, but you're closely monitoring that asset period over period. But once the asset's there, it's basically there, and you just need to make adjustments and disposals throughout the life of that asset. Okay, so we're going to get into best practices for asset addition. We're going to go through a couple different ways that assets can get added to the system, starting with AM20.
So AM20 is going to be the asset quick addition page. And for this form to be used, you need to leverage asset templates. So here we have a screenshot of AM20.1, your quick addition page. And you're going to see here that we put in our generic template that we already had made, company 1, and it's going to automatically populate a lot of these fields here and save us a lot of time. So if you have a lot of assets that are similar, this can save a lot of time. You can still make changes to these forms, but it'll automatically populate those and make it a little quicker for you. So then if we go over to the Items tab on the same page, AM20.1, this is where we're going to add our items. So we only have one item for this asset. It's a building, quantity 1, costs $500,000. And
so is the idea with the template that you're building out templates and then there's things on that template that'll help make this addition process quicker?
yeah.
Like books and asset types and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So the second way.
So that's one, right? Quick addition on AM20.
And the second way is going to be the manual asset addition, and it's going to follow the same general process, but you're not going to have the template that's going to include a lot of the information that you already had. So here you have to add your asset number, tag, asset group, category. We have this one as depreciable. But again, you have to fill in all these fields yourself, so company, location, division, etc. It's all going to be manually entered.
No templates on this process,
no
right?
No templates for manual.
Okay.
Once you click Add, it's going to bring you to the next form, AM20.3. And this is your items form. This is a good example here of multiple items for one asset. So we have one CPU, one full page monitor, and 2 printers. And then up here in the top right, you'll see it's a total of 4 items for $6,000.
And an important thing to note here too, there's a lot of date fields on your asset. The date field on this item form is your purchase date, which is more or less just a field that you can report off of that says when you purchased that item. The field on the date field on the book, right, which we're going to get to right after this, is different, right? And that date is what's going to drive depreciation. AM180 is going to use that date to start to calculate depreciation. So people get kind of confused or they get hung up between those two date fields, but the in-service date is on the book.
Chris, we have a quick question. Are we viewing version 10?
We are. This is version 10.
Okay, thank you.
But I think everything that's covered here today is applicable to version 9 as well. Pretty much, right?
Right.
You'll let us know.
Yeah, the look and feel is different in 10, but the functionality, the forms are basically the same in version 9. You're not really losing anything if you're looking at this from a version 9 perspective.
Okay, so we added the items on AM20.3, and it brought us to the final page, AM20.4. And this is the books that we're going to have included on. So we have an accounting book with the straight line method, and then a federal book. And again, if we had a template on the quick edition, these would be predetermined.
Mm-hmm. So one thing to note, right, if you're using the AM20.1 quick edition and you put a book on there, or you put a template on there, the book is not a required field on the template. So you may have a template that doesn't have a book on there, and AM20 will let you add the asset. It'll give it an asset number, but when you go and release the asset, it's going to say book required, right? There's nothing there because it didn't default from the template. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you have all your templates have books, but if you have a template that doesn't and you use it on AM20, just make sure you come back to AM20.4 and add the book after the fact. Anything else on here? Are we good?
I think we're good.
Cool. All right, so we've talked a lot about asset templates. And let's get into a little bit more about what an asset template is, where it can be used, and the value that it will add to your asset processing. Okay, what is it? So it's a tool. It's AM12 is you're going out to an AM12 form. You're building an asset template in the AM system, and it's a tool used to default asset information onto a transaction. That transaction could be a purchase order. It could be a requisition. It could be an invoice. And we're going to walk through that flow from rec to PO to invoice in the next slide. But if you don't have Lawson supply chain, you obviously don't have requisitions or POs, but you can still use that template on the invoice. And we're going to go through the value that adds. If you are bringing, your organization might be tracking CIPs or capital over in the project accounting system and then capitalizing to AM through that way, you'd also need an asset template to bring in a project from AC to AM. So they're kind of, this asset template can be used in a couple of different places. But the idea is to put as much information as you can onto that template and have that information fall or default onto an invoice, PO, requisition to create an asset for you. Let's go through that flow. So let's pretend that you have Lawson supply chain, you have AP, and you have asset management, and you want to start coding purchase orders or requisitions with a template. On RQ10, at the line level, there's the ability to add a template on that line. Here we just have a generic template coded to this server purchase. It's going to automatically flow to the PO. So when you run PO 100 and generate a purchase order, the asset template that was on the requisition is going to come with that program and get defaulted onto your PO 20 record too. The next step is when AP receives an invoice and tries to match it against that purchase order. The nice thing here is that AP doesn't actually have to add anything. It's going to default, that template is going to just be picked up because it was on the PO. So at the time of match, it generates an AM15 record based off whatever the PO line had coded. Right? We have that generic template on the PO line. So we come to AM15 and we see that there's now an invoice record under our generic template for $10,000. AM15 you can kind of think as like a staging pool. It's an in-between from AP to AM. So it's any released invoice comes into AM15. Your asset accountants work it, right? They might need to reclassify this. We just threw a generic template onto this invoice. But we need to classify that as a building or a vehicle or land improvement, whatever the asset type is. Now your asset accountant can work this queue basically. Take everything from this generic queue, recategorize it, and then eventually create an asset that's depreciable within the asset management system. Okay, so AM15 is a big form if you are bringing in assets through AP. What value does this add? So let's say we do that process and we're bringing in assets from AP, we're coding invoices with asset templates now. Well, this really helps your asset accountants or the people that are creating assets. A lot of clients just have people dedicated to manually adding assets at month end, quarter end, year end. They're going into AM and typing in, right, asset number, whatever, description, all that stuff. Now this is a seamless integration between invoice coding and asset creation. So asset accountants don't have to do that manual add of all the assets. They can have all that come in right from AP. If you have supply chain and you want to have requesters put templates on requisitions, it's a very good idea to think about how we can control that. And one of those ways is through a requisition flow. So you're probably coding any capital invoice or capital requisition to a fixed asset clearing account. And one thing that we could do is create a flow that looks at that account and says, hey, if you're using this account, you better make sure that there's a template on there because we need it. And the requester is not going to be required to do that right up front. But we can create a flow that would either slap a generic template on there if they forgot to put a template on, or just check to make sure that there is one. So if you do have that full supply chain process within Lawson, that's probably a good start because you want to get it right up front. And that's a pretty good segue into the next point, that your requester probably doesn't know how to code purchases, right? They just want something for a project. They're not sure if this is a building with a 30-year asset or a car. Hopefully they know the difference between a car and a building, but they might not know how to code an asset. So a best practice there is to create just a generic template that they can pick whenever they're ordering something for capital. That'll make sure that the requisition gets coded correctly, or at least gets picked up. That same template, again, will get transferred to your purchase order, and then at the time of match, you'll have an asset, or an AM15 record. So the value there is just making sure you're at least capturing everything that's capital. Maybe you don't know that it's capital up front, but the requester can at least say, hey, I know this should be an AM, and you let the asset accountant recategorize that when it hits AM15. A quick snapshot on asset templates. You can have one, you can have none, you can have a million. But there's really a sweet spot in there based off of a few different variables within each organization. These templates are going to look different. So if you have multiple companies, maybe you got 5, 10 companies out there, and you want to have templates that have that company coded on each template, then you would want to create, a section for company 1, a section for company 2, a section for company 3. There's a lot of variables, right? Asset type, company, asset group, accounting unit group. There's a lot of things that you can default onto a template, but aren't necessarily required. So one of the things we want to make sure you understand is that you don't have to build out a template to kind of capture every single nuanced scenario. You want to build them out to capture most. And then you're still going to have an asset accountant looking at these records as they come into AM, and then they can recategorize or adjust as they need. Okay, so that was the flow from AP into AM. Another way to do this whole capitalization process is through the project accounting system, the AC system. Why would we want to go that way? Well, so the AC system, or the project activities system, it's a separate module within Lawson that within this scenario here you can use to capture or track capital projects in a lot of detail. So typically you might have one CIP account on your chart. Maybe you have multiple CIPs on your chart for all your projects, but you're not really capturing the level of detail that you might need. So you can use the AC system to supplement that and code invoices to that CIP account, but also to an activity. So then when you can open up that project or that activity in the AC system, there's a lot of good reports that you can run out of the AC system, but basically it tracks all the costs or the balance for projects over time. Allows you to group invoices and then eventually capitalize that project when it comes due or whenever you want to capitalize. It can be used for CIPs as well as one-time asset purchases. So if you wanted to put, you have a capital budget and that includes both projects and one-time capital purchases, you can put that whole budget in AC, and you can also code CIP invoices to AC and fixed asset invoices to AC. There's no reason not to do that. So that's one way to do it. And the value, again, of the AC system is the fact that it can hold a budget, right? You can have a project, build out a project, and say, there's a budget to that project that we can't exceed. So all those controls are in place within AC. Highly recommend looking into that for CIP projects. And the value there, add a budget, you can report against your budget, and then eventually you can run the AC 160 to take a balance from AC and create an asset. Unlike the asset template, remember we were talking on the requisition that you can't stop a requester from coding a requisition to your fixed asset clearing account without a template. There is that kind of constraint or control with an activity. So you can say for all your CIPs that an activity is required. Whenever someone uses that 17901 account, we have the activity flag set to yes. They need to have an activity on that requisition, on that purchase order, on that invoice, on that journal entry, which ensures that anything that's coded to an activity gets captured over in the AC system. So that's just one control you can put in place if you're using AC. The requester, right? You can say, if Zach's a requester and Zach only is working under, I think we might be. If Zach's a requester and he's only allowed to make requisitions for certain projects, we can have those projects listed out on RQO 4.2, which will restrict what he can request for. So the AC 160, we talked a little bit about that, but if you're collecting balances in AC and you want to capitalize that project when the project's done, the AC 160 is the program to do that. The AC 160 can be run by activity group. It can be run by activity. You can do a whole listing of activities, so maybe you want to pick and choose what projects you want to capitalize at a certain time. You can say, hey, I want to only capitalize a certain account category, which is basically just like an account, only within AC. So in this case, I only want to send over land improvements to AM. So you have that flexibility there too. You can also do account category groups. So you pick and choose what account categories you want to send over to AM too. The post AC, so that's an optional field, but what that's allowing you to do is say after you capitalize a certain part of a project, you can send a credit back to your activity to basically keep track of the fact that you just capitalized a certain amount of that project. So if you're capitalizing a few times over the course of that project, you can send something back, a transaction back to the project that keeps track of the fact that you capitalized. A couple things you want to be careful of, or you want to check before you run the AC160. The first is AC190. So just like GL has the GL190 to post, AC has the AC190. You want to make sure you run that. All your transactions are posted to the projects. Step 2, if your statuses are set up in a certain way that says, this status I can only use to capitalize, or this status I can only use to post, you'd want to change your status on the project to allow this project to be picked up by the AC160. So a quick little check into our status. It shows our the CA for capitalized status, and if that status is on a project, it's only allowed to be capitalized. You can only run AC160 against this. You couldn't post any invoices against it. You couldn't put budget to it. So depending on how these statuses are set up, you might need to change the project to a status that allows for it to capitalize. Okay, so you also want to ensure that the account category allows for capitalizing. This is typically done upon setup, right? With an implementation, we'd go through and make sure that the account categories that should be capitalized are capitalized, or that flag is set to Y. But again, something you want to check, just make sure any invoice coming in coded to 15001, it's got capitalized set to yes, so that's telling me that those invoices will now be picked up by the AC160. Step 4, check out AC69. This form is allowing you to look at an activity, see all the transactions that have come in. In this case, we have 2 invoices coming in from AP. It's telling us that the size is set to yes, if you see that in blue over there. So, maybe in your head you think you have 15, 20 transactions that you're going to capitalize, but only 10 or 12 say capitalize yes. You'd want to come here and change the remaining to yes to make sure everything gets picked up before you run AC160. And then back to our asset template. We come to 10.3. We inquire on our project, and we throw a template on there. Right? So this is, I said way back in the beginning, we can also use templates if we're capitalizing through AC. And this is that step in the process. We put the land improvement template on this project, and then when it goes over to AM, it takes or inherits all of the land improvement characteristics from the template. And then last but not least, there's a couple transaction codes that you might want to fill out. The asset clearing account and the WIP will define what's going to be debited and credited when the AC160 runs. You can actually leave the WIP flag or the WIP code blank, and if you leave it blank, AC160 is going to pick up whatever coding was on the invoice. So if maybe you got different CIP accounts and you can't just default one code here, then you could just leave that CIP code blank, and Lawson will use whatever, or AC160 will use whatever was on the AP20 invoice. Okay, so that's the process. That's the AC160. That's capitalizing through activities. We looked at the process coming from AP. We looked at the process coming from AC. And now we're going to get into some tips of just things that we've come to learn just by having, by doing this for a little bit of time within AM specifically.
Yep. All right, so I mentioned earlier asset quantities on AM 20.3, where you can create an asset with multiple items. And you might have been wondering why this is important and why doing this small extra step can be helpful in the long run. And the answer is, one of the answers is that it'll allow you to do partial disposals. So here on AM 20.3, we inquired on asset 3. It has 3 items here with quantities 1, 20, and 150. If we wanted to partially dispose, we can go to AM40, the disposal page, and you'll see that we have the option of full or partial. So if we wanted to dispose of 50 of the 150 beds for patient rooms on line 3 here, we can easily do so on this form. And one of the things to keep in mind is that you cannot partially dispose of something with quantity 1. Lawson won't let you have a fraction of an item. But anything more than that, you can, 2 or more. So continuing on, for more asset quantities. So one thing you should have AP do is they need to be keying in the quantity based on the invoice at the time of the entry when you're going AP into AM. And by doing so, when they enter it on AP 20.2, they see the invoice for quantity of 10, and they can key that in here, and that's going to transfer over to your AM 20.3 so that your quantity is still 10. If they were to key in just the quantity of 1 and then the total cost, that would still come over to AM 20.3, but if you wanted to partially dispose of an asset, you wouldn't be able to. And just having more quantity, it's just more detail and gives you a better picture of your asset.
What if I forgot to put the quantity in when I initially put it in, it just says 1? Am I stuck with that?
You're not stuck. It's AM 15. You can correct that, but it's going to be
I was on mute.
So the question was if AP forgets to or doesn't put a quantity of 10 in there or whatever, and they just, every time they key a template, it's quantity 1. Right, that was the question, and then we can make that change if you need to adjust it on
AM 15. But it's going to be harder to do so because you're not going to have the invoice right in front of you, and it might be harder for them to know what the quantity is. So best practice, we recommend that AP does that.
Yep.
All right, so combining interfaced assets. You can combine them. AM15 will group interface transactions together into one single asset. And the job AM115 will combine your records into one asset, but there is a catch. So this list here of asset description, tag, accounting unit, compute, asset group, currency, and in-service date, they all need to be stored identically on your AM15.2 records, and then they need to share the same combined code. So it is case sensitive, so lowercase and capitals do matter, and as long as everything is identical and you put the same combined code, you'll be able to combine that into one asset. So I think we have a screenshot here. And AM15.1, you see everything's going to match up, and the combined code over there, asset 1, is for those 3 lines, and we can combine that into one asset.
So what do they type in there? Are they typing whatever they want, or are they picking from something?
You're going to predetermine the combined codes.
Right, so it's like you can basically put whatever you want in there. You put the number 1, you could put your name, you could put anything, as long as that value is the same across everything that you're trying to combine, then it'll group them together.
And this is important because you don't want to key in 5 invoices that represent one asset and create 5 assets. By combining them, you'll be able to keep it more consolidated and your data clean.
All right, so back to AC. There's the ability to, scenario is that you run the AC 160 for your project, you create an asset, it's got an asset number, and then you want to maybe add to that asset. So you don't want to, you could create a brand new asset, but best practice, add to the asset if it's related to that asset, right? So the AC 10.3, there's an adjust tab that allows you to pick the asset number that was already created in AM, and then you can append to that asset. Whatever that balance was in AC will be added to the basis on AM 20.4. It'll actually show as a brand new line record on AM 20.3, your items form. So anything new that you append will just it'll add a new row to all your items on 20.3. There we go. There's a screenshot. So you would append, line item number 2 and 3. Maybe that came over after line 1 came in. Asset groups are a really nice tool on your asset record. Allows you, again, a free form field. Type whatever you want in there, and allows you to group assets. So if you have maybe all assets for a certain project, and you have 20 or 30 assets out there. You can type in that project within the asset group. It then kind of groups them all into that same group, and then you can run a AM260, a current year depreciation, or projections based off of that asset group. In this case, we have an asset group of network for asset number 15. So maybe you have, routers and servers and cables and all these things that you want to group together for a network as a network asset group. You can do that here, and then, like I said, run those reports. And there's also processing jobs that you can run by asset group to just report or process those specific assets. Okay, we talked a little bit about system restrictions, but let's get into that some more. If your AM system is now, your source of truth for assets, we're out of the spreadsheet world, or we've left an old system and we're in AM now. There are certain things you might want to do to control what systems can post to what accounts. So maybe our CIP account, we want to have requisitions. In this case, we have Lawson supply chain. So we want to have requisitions coded there, POs coded there, AP and AM. We don't want to have, you might want to include GL in that system code too, but the idea here is that we're limiting the systems that are allowed to use certain accounts. For your asset type accounts, this is just a Power Tools asset type account. We only have the AM system posting to that account, right? We're not coding an AP invoice directly to the asset account. We're coding it to a clearing account. So really, only AM is going to use that Power Tools account. Maybe you want to throw GL in there too, but typically, if you're doing an adjustment, we'd recommend doing that adjustment in the AM system and then having that feed GL. So we like just the AM system set up here for all your asset types. Your fixed asset clearing account, so where you're coding recs, where you're coding AP invoices. We have AP, you could throw in RQ there, PO as well as your AM system. And if you are using AC, you'd want to make sure that AC is included on this account too. Okay, we touched on partial disposals a couple times today, maybe indirectly. There is the ability to fully dispose of assets and partially dispose of assets, and Zach made it pretty clear earlier that we can't partially dispose of assets with a quantity of 1, and so that's why he was recommending splitting out assets into greater detail, so that if something happens, maybe there's a hurricane and a lot of your computers get broken, you can dispose of 25 of those 50 of that 50 quantity on your asset. So the functionality exists. AM40 and AM145 will do your disposals both individually and in mass via the AM145. Another tip here too, the preliminary close option it's on a few different reports, but we want to highlight the AM260. As you're going through month end, like we said before, AM180, the depreciation calculation needs to run before you close your period. Once that is run, you can come to your 260, set that prelim close to yes, and then it gives you a snapshot of what your AM system looks like before you close. So if there's any changes you need to make, maybe depreciation was off for whatever reason, you need to make an asset adjustment, you have that option before you close the period. Because the big thing in AM is that you can't go back and reopen period 2 or 3 or whatever the prior period was. Once that period's closed, it's closed, and you have to make your adjustments in the current period. So the prelim close set to yes is a good control before you close your system. And then 2 pop quiz questions. When you create, or when you're entering an invoice, when do those transactions feed over to AM? Right, we're putting an invoice in there. We have a template that's coded on the invoice. And at what point does that actually create an AM15 record?
Is it when the AP 175 runs?
You would think, but it's not. It's
I was
actually
thinking correctly.
it's the when you release the asset on or release the invoice on AP 25 or AP 26. As soon as you click that release for non-PO, you'll get an AM15 record. For match or for PO invoices, it's at the point of match. AP
did not know
175 just doesn't do anything into AM. And the question here, so if maybe we have Lawson supply chain, we have Recs, we have POs, we have AP, and the requester or the buyer forgot to put that template on the purchase order. Can we add it after the fact?
Yeah.
We can. So at the AP always has the option of entering an asset template. But ideally it's stored on the PO or the rec and they don't have to look at it. But maybe the buyer says, hey, AP clerk, I know there's going to be an invoice coming in soon. I forgot to put in a template. Can you put it in when it comes? They have that option.
Good time for a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, hi there. So when Chris says a requester can use a generic template, and after the asset hits the AM15, it can be recategorized, does that mean that the template can be changed and the correct template can be chosen by the asset accountant?
Correct.
And what if the purchase isn't a capital item? How is the template removed?
So for question one, yes, as the records hit AM15, there's a tab at the bottom, template detail override, that allows you to pick a new template, and then you basically move that invoice out of the generic queue into whatever you've reclassified it as. Question number two, could you repeat?
Is that it wasn't, well, I think it wasn't supposed to be an asset. So
Yeah, okay, so the requester buyer codes it, puts a template on there, you see it come to AM15. You can just delete it right off of AM15 before you release it, or AP could take the asset template off before it comes
But
in.
you'd probably want to correct the AP distribution so it's not
Correct.
going into an asset account as well.
Yeah.
And then I have a second question here. AM 260 preliminary close can be run anytime.
No, it can be run only after the AM 180 depreciation calculation has been run in update mode.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, that's kind of it for everything but conversion. We're going to talk a couple bullet points on conversion to finish this up. If we don't get sick. All right, so conversion, a couple things. It's cleaner to do this at the beginning of the year because you don't have to worry about converting in year-to-date depreciation. We can let Lawson calculate period one's year-to-date depreciation by running AM 180. When we do bring in assets from a legacy system, it's a really good idea to make sure we crosswalk that Lawson asset number back to whatever your legacy asset number was. Lawson is going to just auto number assets. So asset number 9002 in your legacy system might become asset number 5 in AM. So it's a good idea to use an attribute to crosswalk Lawson back to legacy. We also want to bring in account balances for asset types, depreciation, and accumulated depreciation using AM 99. That'll make sure our AM 270 reports will have the right opening account balance for all of our depreciation, accumulated, and asset type accounts. And then our process is using the AM 96, 97, and 98. We load assets to those forms. Each form does something a little bit different. 96 is just a basic form. 97 is where we're entering all the items that make up the asset. And then 98 is where we're assigning all the books. We load it there, we run AM 500, and then you have Lawson asset numbers created.
That does look like all the questions we have for this webinar.